The first rays of morning sunlight fell gently on the small wooden farmhouse in rural Wyoming. Emily sat quietly on the porch, her hands resting on her lap, eyes fixed on the faded cloth in front of her. On it were the tools her late husband, Jack, had spent years collecting: a worn hammer, a rusted saw, and a few wrenches with chipped handles. Each tool carried a memory. Jack had built fences, fixed wagons, and repaired anything in sight. Now, 6 months after his sudden death, Emily faced a harsh reality: she had no money, no food, and no help. Selling these tools was the only option. She had set them neatly, hoping someone might stop, see their value, and perhaps buy them. Passers-by glanced briefly, some with sympathy, others with indifference. Emily lowered her eyes each time, clutching her shawl closer to her shoulders. The chill of early morning bit through her thin sweater, but her determination burned brighter than the cold. She reminded herself that she had survived worse and that today, even if she had to sell Jack's tools, she would eat. As she adjusted a wrench, a distant sound reached her ears, the familiar thud of a horse's hooves on the dirt road. Emily looked up, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. A tall man approached, dusty boots kicking up the morning dirt. He wore a brown leather jacket, a cowboy hat, and carried himself with quiet confidence. He dismounted gracefully, keeping his hat in his hand as a sign of respect. Emily noticed his gentle, steady gaze, the way he observed the tools without judgment. Something about him felt different from the usual passers-by. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and respectful. "Are these yours?" Emily nodded, hesitating for a moment. "Yes, my husband's. I need to sell them for food." Her voice trembled, betraying the mixture of pride and desperation she felt. The rancher, Caleb, as he later introduced himself, looked at her, and then at the tools, slowly kneeling to examine each one. He held the hammer thoughtfully, testing its weight, and ran his fingers along the worn handle of the saw. "These are good tools," he said finally, his tone neither condescending nor rushed. Emily felt a flicker of hope but kept her guard up. "I only ask what I need for food. That's all I have." Caleb paused and nodded, reaching into his leather bag. "I understand," he said softly. He pulled out bills, counting carefully, and placed them in her hands. Emily's eyes widened. It was more than she had asked. I can't take this much," she stammered, shaking her head. "You earned it," Caleb replied simply. "Hard work deserves respect. I only want to make sure you're okay." Emily felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Here was a man who didn't see her as weak, needy, or helpless. He saw her strength and the life she had fought to protect. As he mounted his horse and prepared to leave, Caleb added one last thing. "I might need some help at my ranch. If you're interested, come by tomorrow. No pressure." Emily watched him ride away, her heart racing. The tools, her memories, and the money she now held were all reminders of the life she'd lost, but also, perhaps, of a new beginning she hadn't expected. For the first time in months, a small smile tugged at her lips, and hope began to stir. The next morning, Emily woke before dawn. Her small farmhouse felt unusually quiet without Jack's presence, and yet there was a strange sense of anticipation in the air. She packed a modest bag with a few belongings, brushing a hand over the worn tools she had almost sold yesterday. They were more than just metal, they were memories, pieces of her life with Jack, and now, symbols of a chance at survival. Taking a deep breath, she stepped outside, where the early light painted the open fields in soft gold. Caleb's horse was already tethered near the porch, and he was waiting with the calm patience of someone who understood the weight of responsibility. "Good morning," he said as she approached, tipping his hat respectfully. Emily offered a small nod, unsure of what to say. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth, and for a moment, she simply stood, absorbing the quiet beauty of the Wyoming landscape. Caleb gestured toward his ranch. "Shall we?" The ranch was a sprawling patchwork of green fields, wooden fences, and open barns. Emily's eyes widened as she took it all in. It was hard work, no doubt, but it was life. Caleb led her inside the main house and explained the tasks: preparing meals, keeping track of supplies, occasionally helping in the fields, and organizing day-to-day operations. He didn't call her a servant or a charity case. Instead, he emphasized teamwork. "We all pull our weight here," he said. "If you come, it will be as an equal." Emily's heart pounded. It was an offer that combined dignity with hope, something she hadn't felt in months. She agreed, and they started immediately, beginning with the small kitchen. Emily moved carefully, chopping vegetables, stirring soups, and arranging ingredients. Caleb, meanwhile, stepped outside to inspect the fences, but he returned often, offering advice, encouragement, or just a quiet smile. His presence was firm but gentle, like the ranch itself, strong, reliable, and dependable. At first, the work was exhausting. Emily's arms ached, her back grew sore, and her lungs burned from the fresh country air. But there was a rhythm to it, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since Jack's passing. Each day, she saw the ranch transform, not just in neat fences and organized barns, but in the way Caleb's trust in her grew. When she made a mistake, he didn't scold. He guided. When she excelled, he noticed. Slowly, Emily began to believe that life could move forward, even after loss. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Emily and Caleb sat on the porch, sipping tea in comfortable silence. She thought of the tools she had almost sold, now resting in the barn, and realized they were no longer a symbol of despair, they were part of the foundation of something new. Caleb glanced at her and nodded. "You've made a difference already," he said simply. Emily felt warmth flood through her chest, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and cautious hope. By the end of the first week, Emily knew her life had changed. She was no longer alone, no longer surviving on scraps. She was part of a rhythm, a community, and a story that, slowly, was beginning to feel like hers again. And all because a stranger saw more than her need. He saw her strength, her dignity, and her heart. Weeks passed on the ranch, and Emily began to feel a rhythm she hadn't experienced in months. The mornings were crisp and bright, the sound of chickens clucking and horses neighing filling the air. She woke early, tending the small garden and preparing breakfast for the ranch hands before helping Caleb in the fields. Though the work was exhausting, it was honest and fulfilling. For the first time since Jack's death, she felt useful again. Her heart, once heavy with grief and fear, now carried a quiet strength. Caleb treated her with respect, never expecting more than she could give, yet always trusting her judgment. He never treated her as someone needing charity, he treated her as a capable partner. Together, they fixed fences, sorted livestock, and repaired barns. Emily learned quickly, and Caleb began relying on her not just for household tasks, but for making small decisions on the ranch. He observed her keen eye for detail in her steady hands, realizing that she wasn't simply surviving, she was thriving. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, Caleb called Emily to the porch. He carried the old tools she had almost sold, the hammer, saw, and wrenches that had once symbolized loss. He placed them carefully in her hands. "These belong to you," he said. "Not to me. They've always been yours, and now they're part of your new life." Emily's eyes filled with tears, not sorrow, but gratitude. She held the tools as though holding a piece of Jack, a piece of her past, yet now transformed. They no longer represented struggle or hunger, but endurance and new beginnings. She realized that while she had thought she was losing everything, life had given her a second chance she hadn't expected. Days turned into months. Emily's presence brought a warmth to the ranch that hadn't been there before. She shared meals with Caleb and the workers, laughed at small jokes, and even found herself humming softly while tending the animals. The ranch thrived under her care, and Caleb found a companion in her, not out of necessity, but out of genuine respect and connection. Their bond grew quietly, naturally, without pressure or expectations, built on trust and shared labor. One late afternoon, Emily stood by the barn, watching the wind ripple through the fields. She reflected on how far she had come, from a widow struggling to sell her husband's tools for a meal, to a woman who had rebuilt her life on her own strength, supported by someone who saw her worth. Caleb approached quietly, handing her a cup of tea. "You've changed this place," he said simply. Emily smiled, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in months. "No," she said softly, "we changed it together." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt complete. The tools, once symbols of survival and grief, now represented hope, resilience, and dignity. She knew that life would always carry challenges, but she also knew that strength, kindness, and trust could transform even the hardest moments into something beautiful. And in that quiet Wyoming evening, surrounded by open fields, the ranch, and a man who respected her, Emily realized that she had not just survived, she had truly begun to live again.